Welcome back to Matter and Meaning. Sadly, due to the timing of when this interview was recorded, I will not be joined by my associate Ben today. However, I will be joined by Dr. Frank Patterson, who's an extremely accomplished Silicon Valley engineer. He started his path as a psychology major, later taking an interest in chemistry, leading him to complete a double major in both psychology and chemistry, after which he finished a PhD in chemistry as well. During his time as a student, a chance event led him to becoming involved in laser physics and optics. This paved the way for him to have an extraordinary career, working in a diverse range of settings, including startup companies, government laboratories, Apple, and Google. Contrary to our other episodes, Frank is here to talk less about the science of his career and more about the path itself, giving many of the undergraduates who are listening a better understanding and a more accurate expectation of what a career path might look like with a STEM degree. So whether you're listening to get a better understanding of career choices or just because you enjoy physics as much as I do, we hope you enjoy.
Welcome back to the podcast that we finally chosen a name for, which is Matter and Meaning. What we're trying to do is look at the matter in the universe and find meaning from it. Um, this is the third podcast, and we have a guest named Frank Patterson. Okay, so I guess maybe you want to introduce yourself and kind of start us off here, just about, maybe what you might have studied and
Sure, sure.
yeah.
It's actually Dr. Frank Patterson, but I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a PhD. No one ever, uses that, but you know. Um, so anyway, yeah, I think Jack, I'd like to just describe for a couple minutes my unusual career path and how I got here. As a teenager, a couple years younger than you. I was very interested in psychology, and I was reading all these books trying to learn about myself. And so when I entered university at Indiana University as an undergrad, I was a psychology major. And I thought I was going to learn about human psychology so I could understand myself better. And in my sophomore year, they posted in the department that as an undergrad, there were some professors that were willing to take you into their research group and you could start doing research even as an undergrad. And so I looked down the list and I went and knocked on this guy's office and he wasn't there. And he was like a human psychologist, for memory and learning. And then just went down the hall, the next one, and that guy wasn't there. And I walked into the third professor, and he was there. And he said, well, in his group, he's studying drugs, and he's studying the effect of drugs on memory and learning.
Mhm.
And why am I interested in that? And, I wasn't, because he's doing animal research, not human research. And I said, well, I don't know, I'm interested in drugs. And anyway, I joined his group. And so I started doing research very early on, injecting rats with drugs. And we would test their memory and learning under the drug effects. It was quite interesting. But after a couple of years, I decided, hey, I should go learn some chemistry because I'm working with drugs and there's neurotransmitters and those are chemicals. And let me go learn about chemistry.
Sure.
And then as it got closer to graduating, I could see that the students in his group that were getting their PhD were having trouble getting jobs. And I said, I think maybe I won't go to graduate school in psychology. Because I got a double major. I picked up the chemistry, so I got a double major in chemistry and psychology, and I decided to go to graduate to get a PhD
Mhm.
in chemistry. And I went to Stanford University in the chemistry department to get my PhD. And I was at the time very interested in organic chemistry, and that is about how to synthesize drugs or pharmaceuticals. And it was I thought it was quite interesting, organic chemistry. But when I got to Stanford, I was taking quantum mechanics course from a professor, and I would go up after the course, or after the class was over, and ask him questions.
Hmm.
And after a while, he says, "Hey, you should come by my group and see what we're doing." And I said, "Okay." So I went over there, and there were students working in the dark with laser beams, just shooting around the room, orange and green laser beams. And I said, "This is too cool. Forget that organic chemistry stuff. I'm going to do this." And that was how I got into optics and lasers, which really became my whole career. I really didn't end up learning that much about chemistry. We were doing more solid state physics, and and that was just the I think the way I look at it is, I had a plan, but there were circumstances that were presented to me, opportunities,
Hmm.
and I just grabbed these opportunities, and I've done that throughout my career. Um, actually, I ended up getting my first job in the aerospace industry down in LA. Then I moved to Lawrence Livermore, and I was working on lasers there. Worked for a laser company, and we were buying lasers from that company. And so he said to me, as well as my boss, he goes, "Hey, how would you like to start a new laser company?" And I said, "Well, that sounds like fun." And that was where Positive Light came in, which was, the laser company that, there were six of us founders, and it was became a very successful laser company
Yeah.
that eventually sold to Coherent Laser.
Hmm.
So, once again, this opportunity just sort of dropped in my lap. And um, so anyway, after that, I left Lawrence Livermore and joined a startup company. So I have sort of a very broad experience, not just that I started in psychology and organic chemistry, and then more in the solid state physics and lasers. But I've worked at startup companies. I've founded a company, and I've worked at large corporations. Then towards the end of my career, um, I ended up going to Apple for 5 years, working on micro LEDs for watches.
Hmm.
And then most recently, I've moved over to Google, and now I'm working on micro LEDs for display, which is their glasses. So you're going to have a set of glasses that has a display that you can see right in your view. So this is an AVR application, an
Sure.
augmented virtual reality, where you're seeing the world at the same time you're seeing this enhancement of this display. And that'll be how I'm closing out my career. I'm going to be retiring in June. And I was recently, my daughter asked me a question the other day, like, "Hey, what would you, if you could come back when you're 30 years old, would you have done anything different?" And, I just, thought through that pretty carefully. And I would not have changed a thing. It was, I enjoyed, pretty much every job I've had. Yeah, I've worked, you always work with some jerks,
Yeah.
and maybe you have some jerk bosses, but the technology was always very fascinating to me, and I've really enjoyed every job that I've worked at. And certainly, one thing I learned was, a lot of these startup companies, they don't make it. I've been at, two or three um, that just went under, and it ends up being, yeah, kind of a waste of time in some ways. I mean, the experience is fun, and the people you work with can be very enjoyable, but um, going to Apple and Google as showing me that, hey, you can actually make money at a real company.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
they, you know, they pay very well, and um, so anyway, that's sort of a synopsis of my whole career.
Yeah, sure. That's very impressive that you can look back and say that you wouldn't do anything different and that you enjoyed every job that you worked at. I'm sure not a lot of people can say something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
I feel good about it. I feel like, how an athlete wants to go out on top, right? He doesn't
yeah,
want to, or a fighter, he doesn't want to keep going, um, and while he's lost it and he's really not, near as good. And,
yeah.
I'm even now I'm making big contributions to being able to test. So I've spent the last probably like 15, 20 years setting up testing for optical devices.
Hmm.
So I designed from scratch the optical system for measuring, say, a micro LED array, and the methodology for how to make the test be automated and to be fast enough. Because once you're trying to produce millions of something, it becomes really challenging to
Sure.
figure out how to test those million.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So you mentioned that you worked at Apple and then Google, and I saw that your title for Apple or job description or whatever you want to call it was a senior test engineer. Can you kind of run through what exactly did you do at Apple? I know you said that you worked on some stuff with the watches, right? But like,
Right. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. So I've been at startup companies that had like maybe 100 people in them, and I've been a manager where I was like senior test director,
mhm,
and I had like maybe 10 people working under me. So I've been in a job like that, and I didn't particularly, I'm really a hands-on guy. I spend a lot, I want to be in the lab doing stuff. So I didn't necessarily like the management side of it. One thing that's nice about Apple is you can be in what they call an individual contributor.
mhm,
So at these large companies, you could be an engineer
mhm,
and you could be like a level, like I was a level 6 at Apple, which is actually pretty high up there. You could be a level one, two, three, four, five, six, or and then there's even seven and on up the chain. And so, and you can also be in the management side of things, and you still have like some level associated with that. So at Apple, I was an individual contributor, but um, the nice thing about Apple is they actually treat the individual contributor as an equal to the managers. So, you could be, very highly rewarded and regarded and still be, not have to be a manager. You could be doing, some pretty important contributions to the engineering side of the products.
sure.
Google set up the same way.
Okay, yeah, I
There's
was actually gonna
levels. Yeah.
ask about that, how different it is because they're both Apple and Google without putting one above the other or putting the other down or anything like that. They're both big tech companies, and to my knowledge, they're both located in Silicon Valley. How different is it working in those
Well, the
environments?
biggest difference is Google is all about software.
Hmm.
That's their thing. They're really not a hardware company. Although, they do make Pixel phones and they do, but in a lot of cases, they're not manufacturing stuff like that. They subcontract um,
Sure.
hardware. And so I found Google in some ways was more difficult because I'm a hardware engineer. Um, they when it comes to like interviewing or or getting your position evaluated. Because yeah, at all these companies, every year you're going to have a yearly evaluation of your work and
Sure.
how well you did, and if you did well, you can get a bigger bonus and or promotion.
Yeah.
And at Google, because the whole structure has been set up for software engineers, it's a little different, and it's a little difficult because the way they're trying to evaluate you is based on like software attributes.
Hmm.
Whereas at Apple is primarily a hardware company. I
Yeah.
mean, they make, computers and cell phones and what have you. And so, in some sense, you're more appreciated or more understood, better understood. Well, at least being a hardware engineer
Yeah.
um, at Apple than compared to Google.
So, you did say that you worked at Lawrence Livermore for a little bit. What?
That's right. Yeah, actually, 11 years.
Okay, so yeah, a little bit more than a little bit.
Yeah, I actually wanted here. Let me mention this.
Sure.
At the beginning here, I was sort of going over all these fortunate things that happened in my career. Well, here's another one. So I mentioned that I co-founded the laser company,
Hmm.
Positive Light. Well, I never left my job. I was working at Lawrence Livermore, and we were building lasers. And Lawrence Livermore allows you to have an outside consulting agreement, and you can do work for a company but still have a full-time job at Lawrence Livermore. And that's very unusual. I mean, you could never do that at a real company. A company is not going to let you part-time go work for some other company.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't care if you flip burgers at McDonald's or something, but um, they're going to be very sensitive to competing competition.
Yeah.
Lawrence Livermore was a great thing because not only did it allow me to work at Positive Light, but we got to take advantage of the Lawrence Livermore work
Sure.
for the Positive Light, but it was all above board and legitimate.
Yeah. Okay.
So
So kind of leading off of that, if you worked at Lawrence Livermore for a while, you must have been engaged in I don't know how long these government run projects go for, but at least more than one project, a couple projects. What was the most difficult thing that you've done there?
um, we were working on state-of-the-art laser systems using a technique called chirped pulse amplification, which I won't explain, but we were building. So the hardest part was I built some very complicated tabletop laser systems
Mm.
that were really difficult to align and keep operational in a stable and reliable way. Um, but it was still at the same time it was gratifying because that sense of satisfaction you get when you accomplish something difficult really drives you forward, and that's the job, the work, that my career has really been able to experience a lot of that. And I've worked on some really hard things that took months to accomplish,
Mhm.
and you learn persistence. And the day that that it really works, you just feel great.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if you worked at this company before Apple. I'm pretty sure you did, and please correct me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but you worked at a company called Styon for
Oh
a while.
yes, yeah, Stein, yeah, that was a I view that one as a deviation to the path a little bit.
Sure.
Actually, my friend founded the company, so Styon got a lot of funding. I mean, got like over $100 million in funding to make SIGs solar panels.
Hmm.
And um, so I went there to set up the testing and also some automated etching processes there. And that was my least favorite job, I guess I'd have to say, because I didn't find the technology that exciting. As a matter of fact, most of my career, I've been generating light by building lasers,
Yeah.
by being involved in manufacturing micro LEDs that put out light. And here I'm at a solar panel company that annihilates light, right? It absorbs the light
Yeah.
and kills the light
Yeah.
and
Sure.
tries to do that as efficiently as possible
Hmm.
to to generate electricity. Um, but yeah, I was only there about 3 years.
Okay. Yeah, so not that long. Were you working with mostly, because to my knowledge, there are two main types of solar panels. Were they mostly PV, photovoltaic, or?
Yes, right.
Yeah, okay. So kind of going back to your education, because we've briefly gone over a lot
Oh
of your
yeah, right.
personal life.
Hmm.
Um, you did mention that you completed two bachelor's degrees and then a PhD.
That's right.
And there's definitely a lot of hard times that come with that. You're probably sitting there at your desk at night sometimes thinking, why the hell am I doing this to myself?
Yeah.
Why am I doing a PhD? Why am I choosing to do chemistry? I mean, any STEM major I bet can relate to that. What kind of pushed you through on nights like
Yeah,
that?
I mean the really hard one was the PhD because that took 6 years.
Wow.
That, it depends, when you're doing the PhD, you're really at the mercy of the professor you're working for. I got the guy that was sort of a slave driver, and we worked, extremely hard. Um, and he was like very involved, kind of hovering over what we were doing. Now, the good side of that was this guy was really passionate about the work.
Hmm.
And, even though, yeah, he ended up really kind of driving us hard, I kind of look at it, it was a valuable experience. I mean, I learned how to do machining. We were machining our own mirror mounts for our laser setups, and we were building lasers from scratch. Working with at Stanford, Tony Siegman, who was a famous laser scientist.
Sure.
Um, so it was difficult. I mean, we would do experiments that lasted 48 straight hours.
Oh,
And because we were doing liquid helium, we were using liquid helium to cool organic crystals
hmm.
down to 4 Kelvin, or actually 1.5 Kelvin, and then we were shooting lasers at them to measure their properties. And it was a really difficult experiment. So if it ever started working, you just kept going and going, and literally we were working 40 hours straight. um, but yeah, at the time it was miserable, uh, but looking back, I wouldn't have traded it. I mean, it was really a set of skills that carried me through my whole rest of my career.
Okay. Yeah, wow, that's super interesting. I didn't really recognize until recently that a lot of people in the STEM industry end up working some crazy hours. I was talking with somebody from Slack the other day saying that sometimes the lasers will operate from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and from
Mhm.
another 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So people will be spending all of their time in the lab for the entire weekend or something, or they'll be ready to go to sleep and then they'll realize that, their project, the laser's being pointed at their project for
Oh yeah.
6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and they're like, oh, okay, got to spend another 12 hours in the lab overnight. Jeez. Yeah, I did not know how common that was until
Well,
recently.
some of the, whenever you're working on something complicated and you're making progress, the one thing you learn is if you stop, you lose momentum.
Yeah.
Like, let's say, I'll pick it up tomorrow morning, it's getting late, and you come back, then you're scratching your head. Okay, what exactly was I doing when I left? And then you have to reset it up, and maybe the temperature's changed in the room, and now it's not working quite the same. And
Yeah, sure.
so, yeah, you you really got to learn this persistence and know when to just sacrifice.
What I know that you've worked mainly with lasers and you were saying solid state. So does that you were working on solid state physics in your uh
Well,
degree. So
in graduate school, I say we worked on solid state physics because we were studying we were studying organic molecular crystals and
mhm,
studying the solid state physics properties of that material
sure.
using a laser. So I sort of actually had a branch point. Positive light sold in like 2003, right,
Hmm.
to Coherent, and actually I sort of left the company in 2000 because when I left Lawrence Livermore, I joined a startup company,
Yeah.
and so I wasn't really able to. Once you're at a startup company, it does get crazy. So this was during the telecom bubble. So
Oh, okay.
and we got $130 million in funding to develop a new semiconductor optical amplifier,
Hmm.
and so I set up all the testing for that. Actually, I had started that project at Lawrence Livermore. So I left. I had to leave Positive Light because I couldn't do both those things because the startup company very demanding.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and when you're younger like that, it's a thing. I mean, you're a lot of people, a lot of guys are workaholics, and you do have to be careful if you have a family to keep the family.
Yeah.
I will say I'm on my third marriage now.
Well, yeah, no, it sounds a bit crazy to say, you have to keep your relationships up, but when you really get into work, I guess it's easy to kind of let everything else slip
Yeah,
away.
right.
And yeah, I mean, you look at the guy who I keep on forgetting his name, but the guy who discovered the neutron had it in his mind that somebody else had also connected all of the dots and that they were also doing testing, and he slept in his lab for like 2 weeks and worked every single second that he was away until he came up with an experiment and showed that the neutron actually exists. Um, so I always kind of like to relate back to that because I'm like, some people, you really have to have a work-life balance. You can't be staying in one room for 2 weeks and
Right.
just working on something. If you've really kind of mainly throughout your career worked with lasers, how does that past experience with Livermore and Apple relate to your current work at Google? If you can talk about it,
So,
I don't know what
well,
kind of restrictions they have.
yeah, so I need to sort of correct your statement a little bit.
Sure.
Until the year 2000, my career started, so I got I graduated in 1985.
Okay.
And I really worked on seriously design. I used lasers, but when I went to Lawrence Livermore, I was designing lasers, and then when I went to Positive Flight, so it's really the serious laser building was for 12 years between 88 and the year 2000.
Hmm.
But all my optical knowledge. So after that, I sort of transitioned into testing. So we were, companies that are making a product, like that startup company that I went to during the telecom bubble. We were making semiconductor optical amplifiers, and so I figured out how to do this very complex testing of that component. And so the eventual goal there is, hey, we're going to make millions of these if the company's successful. we're going to make millions of these little amplifiers, and you need to be able to test that component because you can't ship out a product that's going to fail or it doesn't meet spec.
Yeah,
And
sure.
and so yeah, so sort of the second part of my career, I guess you'd say between the year 2000 and now, has evolved into optical testing. So
Hmm.
I was no longer designing the laser and building the laser, but rather I would might be purchasing lasers to use them as a vehicle to perform testing on these components.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of a nice transition into um, sort of the Silicon Valley world. So you had asked me earlier about Silicon Valley, and offline or a few days ago we were chatting, and
Yeah.
we were having a discussion about, well, what kind of background, what kind of degree do you need to have to work in Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
And so I was telling you that, well, everybody I work with primarily does have a PhD. And I'd say most of them are PhDs in electrical engineering.
Hmm.
Now, some of them might be masters in electrical engineering. If your goal is to try and, hey, I want to work in Silicon Valley, your highest probability comes to get a PhD in double E.
Hmm.
If you want to back off from that, yeah, masters in double E, yeah, you could, if you're good, you can get a job, you can do well.
Yeah, sure.
Um, if you're getting a master's in, physics, it might be okay. I,
Yeah.
I, I just, don't recall in my whatever it is, 30-year career or whatever my career, yeah, um, working with a master's guy that was,
Yeah, just straight physics. It's
I mean,
yeah,
I
it's
mean, there's
probably
also,
not as applicable in that specific.
there are bachelor level double E people too. But they're gonna have a different role. They're not gonna be the movers and shakers and the creative designers
Sure.
about how to do testing. They're gonna sort of be more like a super technician, knowledgeable, but yeah, not really working on the underlying technology.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. I know you've mentioned a lot about double E. What other majors or areas of study do you see people get a lot of masters in and bachelors in for
Well, the software.
listening? Yeah,
Software,
software.
there's a lot of software involved in the testing.
Hmm.
It's a key, it's very key. I work very closely with software engineers um, who write all the software because when you're doing these really custom testing of novel and new products, the software to test that is really complicated and has to be totally customized each time. And you might, be continually tweaking it because partly because the product is evolving and changing, and you need to keep up with whatever the change is, or the customer that you're selling it to might require a different data set or something like that.
Sure.
Well, I was just going to comment. Yeah, the one that the software thing is a little bit up in the air these days with the AI.
Yeah, I was
Although,
just about to ask about that.
although the software people right now they're taking advantage of the AI. They can get like using AI, they can kind of get the initial base software program and then modify it and tweak it. So, but the one thing that sort of struck me was I just did a Google search on Google actually, and I asked Google what fraction of software at Google is written by AI, and the answer is 30% of Google's software is currently being generated by AI.
Yeah, that's quite a
So
big chunk actually.
I know, and I've also heard that the new graduates getting degrees in software are not necessarily finding jobs like they used to.
Hmm.
It's more difficult. But I would say, if you can learn and figure out how what the angle is, how to use the AI in conjunction with the software, you're always going to need, the human brain to, really take it to the final state. I hope.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean that's actually something that I've heard been talked about in the physics department as of right now. At least as of right now, I don't know what it'll be like in the future, but AI is really not great at thinking of new ideas
Hmm.
and being creative as the human mind is. So hopefully we'll always need, our own
Hmm.
brains for that, at least until general intelligence comes along, artificial general intelligence. Um, yeah, so a lot of the software engineers are now using it to their advantage. So in the future, do you see that being more just doubly taking advantage of that? And maybe because I remember on in our conversation a couple days ago, we were talking about how a lot of people are more now under not like the strict job description of what was it, architect,
Uh-huh. Oh yeah,
software
right,
architect.
right.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I liked that way of saying it. I don't know if that's something that a lot of people use, but I thought that was an interesting way of
Yeah,
describing
yeah. A
that
friend of
context.
mine, I think I told you this story. A friend of mine has a good friend whose job is to write apps for, I think, like phones and stuff.
Hmm.
And he was saying that it would take him like three or 4 weeks in the past to write one of these apps. And now he says, "Hey, I'm a software architect, not a programmer," because he can write one in 3 days now instead of 3 weeks by using AI. And he was describing it as some process where he'd get the first go round and he'd look at it and tweak it manually and then put it back through the AI again and would kind of iterate it and be able to do it in 3 days. That's pretty amazing.
Sure, yeah. I bet that takes a lot of the human error out, you know?
Yeah, and another angle here on the AI is that I'm want to learn about, or I'm curious about, is my wife's son is a doctor. He's still doing his residency in radiology, and radiology you can which involves reading X-rays, reading MRIs, reading CAT scans, these images. Well, AI is going to be able to make quite an impact on that, and it's going to be really interesting to see how that ends up working. I mean, you certainly won't want to trust your life
I was just gonna say.
AI just deciding whether or not you have a problem,
Yeah,
a cancer or something. So, but I could imagine, hey, okay, let the AI generate a little report, and then you can go check it out. Then the human would go check it out and see whether it agreed with it or something. But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that sounds pretty scary, actually. I'm not sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. They would have to not tell me about that if I was gonna get a CAT scan or something. Yeah, so I mean that's actually pretty much all of the questions. I'm glad that we covered Livermore. I'm glad that we covered Sion and mainly about also your PhD and your path through school and work. I thought that was very interesting. You were
Oh yeah,
you were
yeah.
completely
I
blind.
guess if I was gonna leave a words of wisdom is don't get locked into a certain path. Don't get locked into, hey, I'm gonna do this. You need to recognize the opportunity when it presents itself and see
Sure.
if that makes sense and go for it.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good way of putting it because a lot of people will be waiting for opportunities or chasing opportunities. Depends on what kind of person you are. But um, I feel like a lot of people might not recognize opportunities when it actually reaches them and lets it go by without even noticing, you know? And that's
Yeah.
that's a pretty big thing. to be able to know when the right time is to say yes or say no to an opportunity if it's maybe
Yeah,
not.
I mean, I guess the other thing I would say, when, a guy your age, and thinking back to when I was your age is, I think you are more receptive kind of because most people your age don't really know what they want to do yet.
Yeah, sure.
And might think they know what they want to do. But like I said, when I saw those lasers shooting around the lab in the dark, and it just grabbed me, and I said, "Oh, I got to do that," and
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, you may, encounter a similar situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's super interesting how you kind of all of these chance things happen throughout your university experience where you're knocking on the doors and you're realizing that, okay, well that professor's not there. That professor's not there. And then this third professor down the door and you're like, "Oh, well that's actually really interesting. I'm going to do that." Then another time when you see the lasers and you get captivated by it.
It's crazy when I think about it, and it really doesn't make sense to go back and think in time that, oh, if I did this, I hated that thing, and but if you change it, it could change everything. So
Yeah, exactly. That's why this is especially for the students that are going to be listening to this in in a month or two. Um, if there's something that you think would help your future, do it now because at least if it doesn't work out, you know it doesn't work out. Everybody always talks about the butterfly effect, but you don't realize that also right now is where you can start these
well,
big things.
actually, you just jogged my memory about something I've always said, which is, there's some people that have trouble making a decision,
Mhm.
and they really, just can't make up their mind, and they just do nothing. And sometimes that can be a mistake because at least if you make a decision, you start down the path then, and you can figure out it might have been the wrong decision.
Yeah,
So then you can back up and go the other way. But
yeah,
if you don't make that decision, you're just wasting time.
yeah, exactly. I hear, at least recently, I've heard this where a lack of a decision is a decision in itself. Anyways, yeah, I think we kind of went over everything. That I had planned to ask you, and I think that's
Okay.
actually also a good amount of time for the podcast. I thought it was going to be quite short because my colleague isn't here, my peer, whatever
Oh,
you want to call him.
no,
So,
after we started talking about it, I sort of, it jogged my memory of kind of my whole career path. And I just kind of decided I really like to share it because
yeah.
it was, I think it's really unique.
Yeah, it is super unique, and I think it has a lot of good things, um, interesting things that students can learn from. Like, don't decide to go extremely narrow-minded early on. Stay
Hmm.
open-minded for as
Hmm.
long as you can, and that it's really the opportunities that come up that you don't expect, which can kind of change your career and stuff like that. And also for students that might want to come to California and go and work in Silicon Valley, they know exactly what they should do their master's in now.
Well, I think so.
I think we can call it at that. I really appreciate your
Okay.
time today.
Well, I
Um,
enjoyed it, Jack.
yeah,
Thanks for asking me.
yeah, thank you so much. And I'm glad that you got to have some time reminiscing about your career and came to the conclusion that you liked it.
Yep, I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah, great. Thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you in the next podcast.
All right, have a good one.
Hey, see you.